You know, by all rights, I really shouldn't like this show. There's so much mounting against it that I should have actually just dismissed it outright. But I haven't. I mean, the animation is minimal and stiff, the color choice is rigid with a flat appearance, and the character designs are just god-awful. It feels like no one cared, not the director or the animators. But then something unthinkable happened. Someone actually dared to care about this project. And against all odds, they did something unbelievable. So, Mahou Shoujo Tokuushusen Asuka, or Magical Girl Spec-Ops Asuka. Is it good? Let's find out when the music picks up. There we go. As I hinted at in the opening, the presentation of this show is so off-putting that I would have normally dropped this series in a heartbeat. But despite the animation's mediocrity doing its best to look as awful as it can for the majority of this series, there's more to it than meets the eye. In the most literal sense. Let me get this out of the way so I can move on to the more pressing parts of this review. I don't like the aesthetic of this series. It's a bit hard to quantify, but I'll still give it a shot. The production comes off as cheap since the character proportions feel off. The eye-to-head ratio on Asuka is wonky. She looks like she has a watermelon on her shoulders at times. Then there's the color palette. It's a little too brown and blue for my taste and lacks warmth when the series is trying to convey it. Further, the quote-unquote better animation is pretty sparse, leaving a ton of this series looking as stiff as an early 2000s Flash animation. However, what it lacks in physical beauty, it more than makes up for in other categories. The person who actually gave a shit on this production was clearly the writer because the script for this series is phenomenal. As I mentioned in my season preview, this show has a novel twist on the magical girl genre. The fact it blends the actual military and magical girls feels pretty realistic for how such a situation would actually play out. They are essentially weapons of mass destruction in their own right, and aligning with the military after a war broke out between humans and the cartoonish evil monsters in this universe is interesting. Further, it's not just a gimmick, that angle informs a ton of the themes in this series, showing what the creator wanted to explore. Survivor's guilt, PTSD, and generally trying to reintegrate into civilian life after seeing some shit. Like friends being killed or parents being dismembered. You know, the usual stuff. The realistic approach to trauma in this series, how mundane things can trigger an episode, and I do mean that in the literal sense of the word. How it's not always an outburst, but sometimes it's just simply locking up in place. Coping with the anxiety and stress rather than just showing it and overcoming with a small pep talk. It's refreshing to see such a tactful take on post-war life from an anime. It shows that the writer did their research and cared about bringing this to life. Not just that, but these moments of weakness and vulnerability define the characters in this series. The struggles that inflicted these issues inform their motivations and current actions. Asuka knows how to help her friend deal with PTSD because she deals with it herself, and she doesn't want those she cares about to deal with that sort of trauma. It fits together so nicely in a neat, cohesive package. Congrats on creating a sympathetic, likable character show. Asuka, one who has such immense power, being a magical girl, chooses to put that behind her so she can live a normal life. It has that feeling of the gallant hero after slaying the evil monster. What do they do after that? As the series asks, try to live a normal life or keep fighting to protect others? Each has its merits, so I'll say I do like the morals this story plays with. But I think what makes this so intriguing is the way the series employs the typical magical girl tropes to drive home its points. A lot of this series feels like the day-to-day lives of a typical magical girl show, with teenage girls hanging out and just having fun. They swim, they go to the movies, and walk home with one another, but there's also that hidden identity aspect that despite Asuka's regular high school girl demeanor, she can transform to fight evil. But whereas this sort of trope is an unnoticed background element to other shows, this is actually where we see Asuka's personality as she builds relationships with those at her school. It's her anchor to the real world that keeps her from complete isolation. The absurd weapons, magical powers, and even mascot characters are given realistic explanations. The weapons are versatile and can change size or shape. The magic is pretty evenly balanced among factions, preventing the typical sure kill special move to wrap up the fight cliche, keeping battles engaging and powers having practical applications. Finally, the mascot characters are there for scouting and analysis support, mentally linking with their partners for utility. It just feels like rather than making a magical girl series, the mangaka decided to ask what would magical girls fight like in real life? which does segue somewhat into the last point I wanted to talk about, and that's the edginess present here. And when I say edginess, I want to clarify that's not necessarily a negative attribute. When dealing with the horrors of war and events that trigger PTSD, excessive bloodshed is expected. By showing these things on screen, it bridges the gap for the audience. We saw the events firsthand rather than letting our imagination fill it in by cutting away. I found this helps with the believability of the character's trauma, which is the main goal this series strives for when showering the screen in blood. It's far more impactful to see a group of people riddled with bullets while the main character looks on, rather than seeing them run and cutting to her reaction with the sound of their screams and gunfire. Seeing the gruesome acts and reactions in close-up detail keeps that sympathetic connection with the protagonist, while also satisfying a cathartic release with villains. Oh yeah, release that tension for me, baby. Oh, sorry. I won't pretend it doesn't feel gratuitous at times, but certainly it serves a purpose in the narrative. That's really my line for tolerance of grittiness and edge in a series. As long as it contributes to the themes of the story itself, I don't have a problem with it, which is why I'd argue that this show, though certainly gory with its action scenes, doesn't quite hit the mark for flat-out edge like many other series do. For something like Hellsing Ultimate, it shows gore for pure shock value, drowning the audience in blood, broken bones, and squelches to the point you're numb to it. Asuka takes a more balanced approach. It reserves its shocking content for moments that impact the characters so the viewers also feel that impact. It builds the characters up and shows the dark depths of the setting, contrasting with the bright moments so you don't feel lost in it. But I guess the real question is Mahou Shoujo Tokuushusen Asuka good? There's not such a cut and dry answer. I like this series, certainly more than I was expecting to when I picked it up. If you're one who can look past flaws in presentation with poor animation and shot composition, the story here is genuinely good and engaging, and I would recommend it on that point alone. This is probably one of the sleeper hits of this season with a slow start that I'm hoping more people get into as it goes on. But then again, I'm a sucker for pseudo-psychological schlock in a gory wrapper. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and do all the other YouTube stuff because that really helps me out. Thanks for watching.